warmer relationships, there was some information and knowledge available to do that. And this played, in my view, a very important role in the reopening of the relationship now 30 years ago with the People's Republic of China. And it also played a role after that, for example, in fostering dialogue from people from the mainland of China and people from Taiwan, where the United States was actually one of the few places where people actually came together from Taiwan and the mainland at that time and could talk to each other. And so I think we have this special responsibility in the world and a mission in the world, that our mission is not confined solely to our local communities. We have an important set of obligations to our local communities. I don't want to be misunderstood on that. You heard before, we're expanding the student population at Rice. We're growing from, say, about 2,900 students to 3,800 students. And there are a lot of reasons we're doing that. But one of the reasons was we thought we needed to be more national and international. And there are two ways to do that. We could have taken the existing student population and redivided it in some way to put more students from New York and China in there. Or we could grow the student population and in growing it, add more national and international students. And we chose the latter in part because we felt we had a special obligation to Houston and Texas, which had been very, very good to Rice. And we didn't think it was right, frankly, to shrink the number of students who we were taking from Houston and from Texas. So we decided not to do that and instead to grow the student population. But I think in terms of the problems we address, the people we educate, we see our mission in a much more global way. And we also see it, I would say, as vital to the education of our own students. Even if we didn't see our mission in terms of helping not just our own country, but helping the world in a broader way, frankly, just to educate our own students, we need to provide an education in today's world that is much more international than it used to be. Just as a point of comparison, one thing I did in a different time in my career, when I first started becoming dean of Columbia Law School, one of my co-authors said to me, "Well, do you want to write books or memos?" Obviously, I voted for memos. But when I was a scholar, one of the things I studied was international trade and international investment. And I think both of them provide some insight on how to think about what universities do in a global age. For example, in international investment, if you look historically at what corporations did, there's an analysis that said what we had as corporations first move internationally, the Dutch East India Company, the old British companies, the word used to describe that activity was transnational, right? That is, they were based in a country, they went abroad, they secured resources, they secured labor, but the whole purpose of that was to benefit the home country and the shareholders in the home country and the people. It was kind of economic colonialism, really, tied up with sort of mercantilist theory of trade, and that led, of course, as you might imagine, to a good deal of resentment around the world. The second stage of corporate development was the move from this transnational model to what was called the multinational model. And that Ford, what we used to have, these really important automobile companies that now you can buy their shares for 75 cents, but Ford, General Motors became what were called multinational companies, in that they went to these different locations. And this was a sort of theory that emerged in many ways in the 1960s and thereafter, was these companies should go various places around the world and become good citizens in those places and have their loyalties. And so they would have operations in South America, or I'm sure some had Coca-Cola in Turkey or whatever, and they would become kind of good local enterprises owned by perhaps an American company, but they were expected to be good local citizens. That became the multinational model. But in today's world, a lot of these corporations have moved well beyond that. You look at another corporation whose stock you can buy pretty cheap today, Citicorp or Citigroup. And they're a kind of global corporation. It's not that they're trying to be a good citizen anywhere, frankly. They're just trying to run a global enterprise for the benefit of Citicorp shareholders, wherever they may be globally, and some are in the United States and elsewhere. But they're not particularly tied in their identity anymore to particular countries in many ways. And so if you think about universities and where are we in that model, I'm not sure we fit too well in that model, but I think the thinking at universities, just the way we are, is we have a rather global approach to things. We are almost as interested in solving some problem in India as we are solving a problem in the United States. You know, we have, of course, a great program in nanoscience and technology, and we have some folks working on using nanoscience, nanotechnology to remove arsenic from water. Now, this is not a major problem in the United States, removing arsenic from water. It is a big problem through most of the developing world. It's a big problem in India, for example. And so they are very interested in this work we're doing. We don't look at this work and solving these problems and say, no, you know, this is Rice University in Texas, United States. Why are you doing this work? We don't look at it that way. We want people to think about the problems of the world with this very global perspective and see what it is that we can contribute to that. Now, how do universities then become sort of global in today's environment? Now, this I can draw a little bit on my experience and how in studying international trade, and particular trade and services. And when I started out studying this, there was what was called the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which subsequently became the World Trade Organization, which sits there in Geneva, and they have defined certain mechanisms for international trade, and some of these are quite obvious. These include, for example, having foreign consumers travel to the local provider. If I thought I needed to get some of the few hairs I have remaining cut, and I traveled to France to get a haircut, that would be one way to do that. Having employees travel overseas to deliver services locally is another way. Providing services through telecommunications, and some universities are starting to do this, distance learning on an international basis, or establishing local facilities or operations, so foreign branches, what you see now, for example, merging in the education city in Qatar or something. These are all ways in which businesses become more international, but also ways in which we now see universities becoming more international out of a variety of motivations. Universities are involved in all of these, but the most important remains, in part because we are, in fact, so rooted to this idea of a campus and the environment that we provide. The most important is bringing foreign students to the United States. Now, if you look at this just economically, foreign students contribute to the American economy, net of scholarships, about $15 billion each year. So at some level, this is pretty serious business. And of course, American universities are remarkably successful.